Chapter 286, Corpses. That time an American was reincarnated into another world by SP Forda. August 17th, 628. Sorry, babe. Gonna have to leave you behind for this one. I smiled at Amara, the few agents around me prepping the last of their gear. She sighed with a frown. I don't like you taking this risk alone. I can be subtle too. With my equipment, I know you can. But we've got protocol, and these guys know how to follow it. Would I really be that much of a liability? Are you really looking for that answer? My brow raised at her, and she turned her head with a huff. So you're saying you hate me? Huh. Don't you start putting words in my mouth, Missy. We'll be back before nightfall, and then I'll take care of you as much as you want. You can wait for me at the estate if you're that eager. No, I'm gonna be watching. Enjoy the show then. I leaned down and gave her a kiss, slipping in some tongue before wrapping mine around hers. She stiffened a bit, and I pulled out, smiling as her pale face flushed. Bad. Love you too. Now get on out of here. Daddy's got a vault to raid. I sent her off with a pinch on the ass, checking my gear one last time before rounding everyone up. I was the fifth man in this team, and today, we were collecting intelligence. I found the suit I wanted. The Armored Personnel-Powered Exosuit, Model AP-88, Infiltrator configuration. The Infiltrator suit was designed with stealth and mobility in mind. Still moderately armored, the Infiltrator had special pieces of technology designed to almost completely eliminate one's physical signature, only limited to optical obscuration. I stepped into the suit, its sleek form wrapping around my body. The technology in this suit was even greater than that of the Assault Exosuit. The structure, its spines, and all of its little components were smaller and streamlined. It could take the beating the Assault suit could, but its bulk was less. After the suit configured itself to my body, I lifted the helmet. Its face was similar to that of the flight suit, a visorless shell with multiple optical lenses around the front, dark and lifeless, drinking in all that entered them. I slipped it on, feeling it clasp around my head and link with my suit. The HUD booted, going through its diagnostic, my eyes flickering with light. I saw the sight around me, another expanded field of view, including a separate screen showing directly behind me. I had eyes on the back of my head, no blind spots, besides directly above my head. I glanced at the other four agents around me, their bodies covered in our latest generation of armor. None of them were using crystal or mana rifles since they would easily trip alarms, so all weapons were cold. After everything was in place, we boarded a plane and set off to our target, the territory of Duke Ballistra. Amara sat down in a chair beside Polly and Jasmine. They were in front of a wall of screens showing video feeds from everyone in the outgoing squad. She glanced at John's feed, seeing him tampering with a gun she didn't recognize. It was silenced and had some interesting tech on it, though she couldn't guess what it did. They were silent in the plane, only stepping up when the time for drop came. The green light was lit, the hatch was opened, and they stepped out. They fell through the atmosphere for a time, their jetpacks burning when they were close to ground and killing their momentum. Their feet hit the ground, Amara glancing at an aerial feed to the side. The Duke's mansion was 2 miles from them. Located in what some would consider the middle of nowhere, Duke Ballistra was a major exporter of livestock goods. They owned vast ranches and farmland, being one of the richest nobles in the entire kingdom and a vital part of the economy. However, in recent months, John had started to see some patterns. The kingdom's dark forces were beginning to develop their own aerial technology derived from his own. For the sake of making absolutely sure that John couldn't spy on them, they started to manufacture and distribute their own aerials to their own people. They also deployed their own nodes, creating a secret communication network across the kingdom exclusive to them. It wasn't something John could easily monitor, not nearly as easily as the open book that had been the normal NodeNet. After mapping out certain areas based on traffic and comparing it over time, John noticed that some places had gone dark. These places were either owned by the Third Claw or were migrated to their NodeNet. That meant secrets, and John didn't like being in the dark. Not that this mission was exclusively for breaking into this NodeNet. John said he found something interesting, and this was the first lead. After hitting the ground, the squad started moving. John's suit went invisible in the vision of the other agents, all of them flying across the grassland under their feet and rapidly making an approach to one of the buildings attached to the mansion. The entire estate was huge, with a dozen interconnected buildings and hundreds of people throughout them. It had heavy security as well. They saw guards posted around the large walls that surrounded the bulk of the mansion. After all the assassinations, every noble had multiplied their security, and dukes were no exception. They may not be afraid of an assassin, but they had people around them they wanted to protect. Along with the guards were a myriad of security measures: scanners, alarms, coded doors, and reinforcement magic everywhere. According to some of the recent assassinations, they also started employing life monitors on all the guards. If one died, they would know, and it would send the entire establishment into a frenzy. They couldn't just go around killing everyone, especially not the important people. The five ran to the gate in the wall. It was closed and locked, but they had come at this particular time for a reason. A wagon was already approaching the gate from the inside. Once close, the gate opened and let the wagon through. The squad simply walked in despite there being a dozen different scanners that washed over them, courtesy of John's new programmed magic series of devices. He has used a similar device when handing off Faye's new armor and spear, and from then on it had been frequently used by Pale Horsemen in their assassinations. Completely and utterly undetectable by all current means of scanning, proved once more by this mission. After walking through the gate, they ran across the grounds before finding a particular building close to the main building. Once there, John stabbed his seer knife into the door's lock, half a second passing before he pushed it open. They moved interior, still completely silent, not a single word being uttered along the way. Amara had to admit that they moved fast and efficiently. She had been joking with John earlier, but seeing them in action, she knew she really would have been a liability. Not that she was bummed. She was perfectly fine letting the professionals do their work. The building they entered was the security post, where all the operations of guarding the complex originated. The security measures on this particular building were intense, but before John's BioWare, they all crumbled. They moved through the security post and found the control room where the Authority 10 Nephilim, the head guard, was stationed behind a console. John stopped outside the glass windows that peered into that room. The Authority 10 was just sitting there completely relaxed, watching the wagon at the gate leave. Nothing else was happening. It was just another routine day. John looked down at the console. Right against the wall, it was within reach despite them being unable to walk into the room undetected. John stabbed his knife through the wall, reaching the enchantments on the other side. Amara saw another screen pop up in front of her, dense pages and logs of data streaming across it. Within seconds, the entire security system was under John's control. The life monitors were frozen and set into a loop. Now it wouldn't alert anyone when someone was killed. Their trust in their tech would blind them. Then they got the codes to every door and deactivated the alarm functions of every scanner, ensuring smooth entry into most levels of the complex. They downloaded all data available, including maps and blueprints. On those maps was a secret underground complex, their target. John pulled his knife out, a wireless access point left behind. John could wirelessly control everything from his personal systems now, also completely undetected, another courtesy of his program magic. Even if they detected the stray signals, not only would nobody be alerted, but they wouldn't know where they came from. The Mantle of Wisdom's principal technology was still far beyond anything the kingdom could muster. They rapidly left the security post, their first job completed after a mere 10 minutes. From there they went to the main building, simply jogging past every guard, maid, and noble offspring they came across. John stared at the Nephilim family while moving past them longer than he looked at the guards or maids. The sight of those horns and markings were probably pissing him off. Amara checked their biometrics on another screen. John's heart rate was sitting at 43 BPM, all metrics completely stable. The other agents were hovering around 80 or 90, a little higher than normal, but clearly showing their slight anxiety. Being Authority 9, none of them were so strong as to be easily noticeable, but not weak enough to be incapable of combat. Still, being in the mansion of a duke, and so brazenly walking through it, and among its inhabitants completely invisible was enough to get anyone a little excited. From the main building they went down a hall where all kinds of paintings, statues, and trinkets were on display. The architecture and decoration were excessively rich. There were entire columns and display pedestals made entirely of gold and reinforced several times over. It was an amount of money that made even Amara gawk. Her mother, even if only slightly less rich, never gilded her household like that. They moved through the hall, and found themselves before two huge double doors, closed and locked on an independent enchantment. Before it were four guards dressed in ornamental armor as strong as they were opulent. The guards, all authority 9, were standing there silently, albeit a bit lazily slumped. This was the door to the vault. John glanced at the other agents before finally speaking. "I'll unlock it first." Some nonverbal signals from the others signaled their acknowledgement. John moved past the guards and up to the doors, going to a knee and taking out a device. It was a new illusory device, capable of not just making things invisible, but putting out dynamic images. After dropping it and activating it, he took out his seer knife and cracked the lock on the doors. Despite being on its own independent and much more thoroughly made enchantment, it still didn't stand a chance. Data was sent back simultaneously, showing the layout of the enchantment and its functions. Amara glanced at it as the other agents prepared to kill all the guards, dropping their own illusion devices near said guards. The door had a complex enchantment that required 2 physical security keys to open. However, there was data for a dozen other keys, all of which would trip a secret alarm when used to open the door. They were bait, and there was even a secret function embedded in the real keys that demanded a special action to verify the user of the key. If anything was done incorrectly, such as by a thief who got the key but knew nothing about the hidden instructions, it would trip the alarm. Yet John cracked it in seconds. All he had to do was cut the pathways from the keyholes and let the BioWare spread like an infection. The enchantment was taken over, put under his full control. With everything ready, John activated his illusion device, which spat out an image of the closed door. Then he opened it, watching the 4 guards. None of them reacted to it, the agents all standing next to them with their own weaponized seer knives to their necks. Seeing that they hadn't been found out, the agents retreated, retrieving their illusion devices and slipping through the door. John closed it, using a small mute field to mask the sound. The 5 moved into the vault, so far still completely undetected. They were greeted with the sight of a well-lit library. Except, it wasn't a library of books. It was a library of wealth. There were hundreds of shelves, all of them labeled and holding thousands of spatial storage devices. Amara saw John slowly scan across the shelves. Like her, she could tell that he was baffled by how rich it all was. That was the accumulation of many generations and extremely powerful family heads. This was the vault of the Ballistra Dukedom. It wasn't where they kept everything, but it was where they kept their most valuable possessions. It was almost criminal how easily John had snuck into such a place. The enchantments on it were top-notch, containing power attempting to rival a sovereign. Unfortunately, John's BioWare backed by a neural gem and empowered with programmed magic meant that there was no enchantment in the kingdom capable of resisting his control. Programmed magic could only be stopped by programmed magic. It was only unfortunate that, out of fear the neural gem might grow out of control, John had taken his careful time integrating programmed magic into its systems, only recently developing his seer knife to such an extent. It was also the only reason he was conducting this mission now, and why he had to be on it personally. After giving themselves almost a minute of inspiration, the squad put their heads back down and moved through the vault. This vault wasn't actually their target. It was only the doorway to it. John moved to a podium where a catalog was resting. After stabbing his seer knife into it, Amara saw another batch of data come through. It was a list of everything in the vault. Amara was tempted to go through it and see what was in there, but she eventually didn't bother. They'd be taking it all anyway. John would never let such wealth remain in a corrupted noble's hands. Or any nobles, for that matter. Finally, John seemed to have gotten the data he needed. Taking out his knife, he moved with the squad over to a bookshelf on a wall. John stabbed the knife into the wood of the shelf, some enchantments flashing to life before suddenly activating. The bookshelf clicked, and John pulled it open. Behind it was a secret doorway with yet another top-end lock. It was dismantled, and soon the squad entered a dimly lit room. On the floor was surprisingly a teleportation pad. "I got it." One of the agents spoke, stepping forward before anyone else could. John watched him before using his knife to tap into its systems, activating the teleporter. The agent flashed away. There was silence for several seconds before the pad flashed again, the agent reappearing. "It's all clear. Let's move." They all stepped onto it, flashing away. Their video feeds went out for a short time, flickering back onto Amara's screen. They appeared in another room, John moving through the door, which didn't have a lock on it. Amara felt her pupils narrow when she saw the sight on the other side. It was a massive underground cave, thousands of feet long, wide, and tall. There were massive stone and metal pillars holding up the ceiling. And in the center of the room lay the preserved corpse of a dragon, the paragon of mana, one of the three most noble beasts of the world. It was colossal, clearly hinting at its power when alive. Amara couldn't fathom what it must have looked like in its prime. Now it was a faded corpse, preserved in foggy ice. The entire room was chilled to extremely low temperatures, a feat which no doubt took massive amounts of power and the corresponding white crystals. That wasn't mentioning how long it had been this way. Considering the paragon beasts had been effectively extinct for well over a few centuries, the investment sunk into this place was unfathomable. Yet it couldn't compare to the value of the corpse. It was almost wholly intact, still. Most of its scales were there, as were its wings. None of its claws were still on its limbs, however. There was also a large hole in its chest. Amara quickly noticed the people around the corpse, as did John. Two of them were on scaffolding to access the hole in the dragon's chest. Its organ harvest was ongoing, but that implied that after all these years, they were finally choosing now to cash in on their hidden wealth. Amara frowned. They were empowering themselves right now. John's guesses about how urgent the situation was were turning out to be more true than ever. A single dragon that large had enough material for a large group of very powerful people to get saturated with crowns. Although king bloods and royals had no use for crowns, now the ability to receive them, Nephilim did. That dragon corpse was a massive source of combat power. Hold. John spoke before the other agents could move. Their original goal in coming here was to get a look at the anomaly John had spotted, as well as make a backdoor into a portion of the third claw's new node net. This was completely out of expectations, though. Amara knew what kind of ramifications this information would have. She also knew what kind of frenzy they would stir by stealing the corpse, as well as all the wealth in the vault. John stood there, staring at the corpse, his voice suddenly aimed at the spectators. "You there, Dove?" "I'm here, Envoy. What do you think of the view?" Amara gave a wry chuckle. "It's amazing. So amazing that I'm not sure if there's any good way to proceed from here. We take that dragon, and all of our enemies will lock onto us. I'm sure they already know it's us. But we're maintaining this state of affairs because neither of us can afford to escalate right now. If we take the dragon, though, they won't care. Indeed. What makes it worse is that this is only a duke's loot. Not only might this duke hold other corpses and materials elsewhere, but the Grand Duke and sovereign households have their own vaults, and they're likely filled with corpses just like these. And they're starting to thaw them, harvest them." Amara felt a headache coming on. The Nephilim were already powerful, as was the Scourge. They had every advantage in this war. Amara believed with every fiber of her being that if John weren't here, the Scourge would have their way with them, and they'd all be doomed. But this theoretical stockpile of power was chilling to imagine. The Kingdom of Dragon Tongue was named after a paragon, and yet they were precisely the ones to drive the dragons to extinction. Amara didn't know the details of what happened during that history. It was too long ago, but it didn't take a historian to connect the dots. How many dragons had there been? Even if some of them escaped, it would only happen after so many battles, if not a war. So how many dragon corpses, how many paragon corpses, were in the hands of these powerful noble households? Were they precisely the source of the nobility's confidence? Nobody could ever guarantee that their family would raise a powerful heir every generation that it was needed. But if you were a warlock family like the Ballistra line and had dragon corpses to make crowns from, it suddenly wouldn't feel like such a pipe dream. That was just for the warlock families too. The knight families likely had lord beasts, paragons of vigor, ready to pull from for the same purposes. They weren't around either, after all. The issue was that this was a colossal secret. Amara wondered if her mother knew. If she did, then it was no wonder why she always maintained airs as if she knew better. She knew about the secrets of the nobility tightly linked to the royal family. The Teleria line didn't originally form around the kingdom's royalty, after all. They and the Raven family were independent families with exceptionally powerful heads that established their nobility with sheer strength. It wasn't crazy to assume that they'd be kept out of the loop even many generations later. But Amara knew her mother had connections in the black markets. She knew how to collect intelligence, and even then, this information had likely been recorded by ancestors long past. If she was really planning rebellion with the Raven Chief and wanted to monitor the noble family's usage of those corpses, suddenly, things were making sense. Let's grab intel and go. John spoke, the agents all moving through the cave. They found any and all devices and orbs in the buildings nearby, offloading every bit of data on them and linking them with John's NodeNet so they could continue to be monitored later. After that, they captured plenty of footage and evidence, including samples of the corpse that they stole from under the workers' noses. After that, John gave the command, retreat. The squad quickly moved, all of them leaving the cave and going back through the teleporter. From there, they raided the vault. They plucked out spatial storages and emptied their contents, packing them into their own and placing the others back into place. There were also old records, so John went through those and acquired all the data he could. The vault was expansive, so it took a good amount of time. When they finally emerged and locked the vault behind them, night had fallen. They left the mansion as easily as they had entered, John resetting the security systems back to normal on his way out. Amara sat back into her seat while they made their way to the extraction point. There would be a lot to digest, as well as some big decisions to be made later. She wondered how soon they could afford to really piss off their enemies. Chapter 287, Fruitful Operation. That time an American was reincarnated into another world by SP Forda. August 17th, 628. Amara jogged a bit, John taking large strides into their room and outpacing her. He went straight into his workshop and booted up his desk, rapidly punching in commands. Come on, spit it out. What are you looking for? Amara asked while glancing at the huge screen projecting a map of the kingdom. Thousands of lines of data streamed on another screen. John stared intently at the map, Psyche moving through his body and the workstation. I originally found that place by creating a heat map of the NodeNet activity over time. After that, I overlaid a map showing some recent magical scans collected from the nodes. I found a pretty genius way of making them pick up on Magica signatures with some simple reprogramming thanks to Sant's recent tech developments. I've also tasked a squadron with surveilling the entire kingdom with our latest aerial magic sensors. After piling all those maps on top of each other, this is what I got. John brought up the map, various intensities of colors across it. When he zoomed on Duke Ballistra's territory, Amara clearly saw the splotch of high mana density on it. The vault. After centuries of that dragon resting there, the mana has permeated the ground, saturating it enough to be picked up on sensors. So if you look at other areas, John zoomed out with her words, showing other noble territories, especially those warlock families. Amara saw high densities of mana over almost all of them. More dragons. Yes, except I didn't guess that the dragons were the cause of that saturation. Now that we know, though, we can scan across the entire kingdom and pick out their vaults. We can do the same with any potential lord beasts as well. Vigor shows up the same exact way. John changed the heat map and leaned back, the hotspots landing right over the night families. With this data, it looked all too obvious. John motioned to the screen. Just based on this map, there are at least 600 sites that hold dragons, 50 of which are at or above the saturation level of the one we found. The lord beasts are fewer in number, but similar in saturation. Not to mention that those are just sites. They could hold multiple dragons and lord beasts at those sites, so there are likely thousands of each in storage. And all of them are being harvested. That's an unimaginable amount of potential power enhancement. That it is. John sighed and went quiet, Amara glancing at him out of the side of her eye. So, what are we going to do about it? Well, nothing until we can figure out the means to steal massive corpses from underground vaults. Corpses that can't or won't fit into a spatial storage, that have to be whisked away from right under the noses of very powerful people and their centuries of accumulated wealth and security. Well, don't take this as a promise, but I might be able to help with that. Amara couldn't help her smile, John turning to stare at her. What did you do? Same thing I've been doing for the past many months. I've finally gone through all of the spatial spells my family possesses. I'm thinking that their applications are perfect for what we're facing at the moment, provided that they're combined with your own magic. John remained quiet for a time, slowly grinning, a menacing thing. Amara started beaming, sensing the palpable anticipation in his eyes. His arms started snaking around her waist. My fiancé, my lovely partner in crime. Yes, my dear. I'd like to hear more about these spatial spells. Care to join me in bed so we can talk about them? Well, I'd say my study is a better place if we're looking to talk about them. We can certainly talk there too. John scooped her up, kicking through the door and striding to Amara's study. She squirmed around in his arms. Wait, I don't want to get the parchment wet. Not sure what you mean. We're just talking. Your fingers say otherwise. Huh. Come on now, start talking. I want to hear all about these spells of yours. Amara jerked before her breathing hitched, her legs clamping down and making John laugh. The study door closed the two of them in, muting all sound in and out. A week passed. Amara continued to mess with her spell work so it would suit our purposes. In our room, I changed into a nicer set of clothes before topping it all off with my coat. I sighed before walking into Amara's study. In the center of the room were two massive metal platforms with enchantments sprawled across them and parchment laid out at certain points with directions and information. Amara was kneeling near one portion, putting together a complex part of the enchantment. I walked behind her, bending over and glancing at the enchantment. I'm heading out. All right. Once I finish this, I'll run the test. Be careful. I gave her a kiss on the top of her head and walked out. Erhan escorted me to the helicopter, which I took all the way to the capital. There, I landed on top of the Black Spider Hotel. I was here on business. Surprisingly, there was someone other than the key master there waiting for me. The masked man bowed when I approached, Erhan following by my side. They await you in the meeting room, sir. Lead the way. I smiled, the masked man turning and leading us into the building. We took the elevator to a special floor, the door opening straight into the meeting room itself. The room was lavish, though not excessively so. There were two couches facing each other with a chair at the head and a small table between them, pastries and tea already waiting atop it. The key master was standing in front of the chair, and Lady Luna was sitting on one of the couches, the two smiling when I entered. Luna stood on my arrival, and the key master spoke. John, it's good to see you. Likewise, key master. Lady Luna. I moved over, giving Luna a hug before shaking the key master's hand. Then we sat down, Erhan remaining with the masked man in the elevator and leaving. The door closed, the three of us left by ourselves. I looked around the room for a second, feeling something off. Luna spoke from across the table, helping herself to a pastry, not her first one. I'm a bit surprised, John. You called us here so urgently. Did you discover something? I did. If you don't mind us getting straight into business. Of course not. We're all ears. Thank you. I took out two terminals, handing one to each of them. They took it curiously, the screen lighting up. Roughly 2 weeks ago, I started mapping out some data that I collected from the NodeNet and aerial scans of the kingdom's major territories. First, I discovered that the Third Claw has migrated their communications to their own custom NodeNet. Second, I discovered major hotspots of mana and vigor saturation within certain noble territories. I launched a mission to infiltrate the mansion of Duke Ballistra. I'm sure you two are familiar with him. Certainly. The key master automatically nodded, not surprising me. Even Luna affirmed. Yes, he's quite the rich man. Owns the majority of the most profitable farmlands in the entire kingdom. He's an entire portion of the economy by himself. Without him, a large percentage of humanity would starve to death. He definitely is rich, and I got to see firsthand. I got into his vault, and what I discovered is precisely what I'm here to discuss. Into his vault. Luna's brows raised. That's quite the feat a man like that would only have the greatest security measures throughout his mansion. I know the Order certainly couldn't pull something like that off, especially not entirely undetected. Indeed, I haven't heard a word about any break-ins. The key master added, my smile growing in pride. Well, call it a trade secret. Anyway, we got in and out without issue. And this is what we discovered after finding a hidden teleportation platform inside. The image changed on their screens, showing a dozen different pictures of the massive dragon in the underground cave. Both of their eyes widened, Luna glancing up at me. That's quite the secret you've stumbled across, John. Hence why I'm here. You intend to do something about it? Don't tell me you plan to steal it. Oh please, I could never do something so small. I chuckled, their screens changing again. It showed a map of the kingdom, with dots all over it. Each of those dots is a potential storage site for not just a dragon, but lord beasts. My plan, Lady Luna, is to steal them all. She stared at me, not so much surprise as there was seriousness on her face. It only looked funny with the bit of frosting on the corner of her mouth, though. John, you can't possibly be thinking of trying something so impossible. You think I'd propose something that I hadn't thoroughly considered the risks and possibilities of? That I didn't already have a plan for? The Keymaster nodded. Indeed, I believe in Sir Cooper's intelligence. However difficult, something like this certainly isn't impossible, but its consequences are accordingly proportional to its difficulty. I'm curious about what your plans are and how we can help. They both looked at me, my smile persisting. My plan is to steal most, if not all, of their stockpiled corpses. We all know that the kingdom is being corrupted, and their new image is the Nephilim. Well, I don't intend to let them harvest all of that material for their gain. If we can steal it all, it will not just rob them of their accumulation, but will allow us to use it instead. We turn their strength into ours, gaining another advantage. But naturally, it can't be done by any simple means. It would have to be done all at once, because once one person hears of it, they all will. We also have to steal those corpses in such a way that we can get past whatever layers of security they have. That unfortunately means teleportation. Then, we have to plant these teleportation arrays underneath every single corpse we plan to steal. That means a lot of enchanting, and it has to be done right under their nose, completely undetected. It's starting to sound pretty impossible, John. Luna commented when my words finished. Gone was her cheery disposition. I was dragging her into a heist the likes this world has never seen, and being a proxy of the church, they likely had their own plans that couldn't be deviated from. If this went wrong, it would do just that. They couldn't activate assets for nothing. I motioned with my hand. I have someone who can make it possible. As we speak, my fiancée is developing the spatial formations for this large-scale teleportation. She develops the spells, and if those pictures are any evidence, I already possess the means to get in and out of anywhere without detection. At the very least, these vaults are no different from open doors, provided a bit of subtlety. Luna paused, glancing at the key master who simply sat there, prim and proper. I leaned forward. I may be biased, but my fiancée is an excellent warlock. She'll get me the finalized spell formations, and I'll provide the means and the men to carry out the rigging. We'll go to each vault one by one and set up the formations. Then, all at once, we'll simply teleport them away. They lose, we gain. Luna sat there for a few seconds before nodding. Very well. Let's assume you make it possible. What do you need our help for? The retreat. Those teleportation formations won't be able to go far. The expenditure is too much, and no matter how rich I am, packing that many crystals into a formation in the heart of an enemy vault and remaining undetected for extended durations is unlikely. That means these corpses are going to be teleported not far from the vaults themselves, perhaps a matter of a few miles. I don't have the manpower to grab them all at once, all across the kingdom, and fly them out. So I need hands and helicopters. Unless you have some top-end spatial storages that can hold a bunch of massive dragon and lord beast corpses. Definitely not. She shook her head, sighing and leaning her head on her fist. She closed her eyes, the key master remaining silent. Eventually, he asked, "Do you need help planting the formations?" No. I plan to rig the vaults over a long duration. There are hundreds of vaults, and I only have a few teams that can work one at a time. Even if they rig multiple vaults a day, assuming no mistakes or mishaps, it'll take months, if not a full year, to finish them all. So this isn't something that's going to happen right this moment. But it can be done. It just has to be subtle and fast. Rob 1, and they'll go crazy trying to figure out who did it. Rob 2, they'll all lock down their vaults. 3, and you can forget about any dukes leaving their households. They'll start pointing fingers out of panic, and with the way things are going, they'll likely land on me. I can't handle that right now. But you'll be able to in the near future? Luna asked, making me shrug. In the future, I don't particularly care what happens. I have my own plans regarding the third claw and what may happen to my Iron Legion. Do your plans involve being completely dissolved? Because that's what's going to happen. If the third claw turns its attention to you, you're going to end up dealing with the powers behind them. And if you didn't guess, that's a sovereign. Not to mention the political backlash. You'll have the king framing you for high crimes and coming for your head personally. At that point, your only option, short of starting a war, is to flee. They certainly aren't going to go after the church publicly, and the church isn't going to back you publicly. I know. I answered simply, which seemed to make her a bit angry. John, I'm telling you these things out of concern and care for both you and Amara. She's going to follow you into hell, but I don't want you dragging her there on a whim. The church is making its own plans regarding the kingdom, with or without the dragons and lord beasts. We know about their stockpiles, and we knew it was going to fall into Nephilim hands. Your action isn't necessary, especially if it'll end up dissolving humanity's second most powerful military. I think you mean most powerful, and yes, I know that the church is aware of the stockpiles. But were they aware of the Nephilim? 5 years ago, did they think the Nephilim would appear? My smile faded, Luna leaning back. Of course not. Nobody saw the Nephilim coming. They're a new form of corruption, recently developed. Indeed. Developed by an otherworlder, right? Luna's eyes widened. I made sure to stifle my smile while taking out and lighting a cigar. I let out a long breath of smoke. The church knows about people from another world. They know I'm one of them. They know that there are some on the side of the scourge. What they didn't know was the level of threat that they posed. The Nephilim was an unexpected factor that immediately cemented the scourge's ability to take complete control of the kingdom. They're going to end up killing a massive portion of humanity as well because of it. But my Iron Legion was just as unexpected. My technology instantly multiplied humanity's combat power several times over. My planes give us the skies and uncontested mass slaughter. I even gave that technology to the church, essentially free of charge, but I'm not willing to bet on it being enough. Because of the Nephilim, and because of whatever else the scourge may develop and deploy, we no longer have the room for allowing our enemies to grow their strength. These dragons and lore beasts represent a massive boost in top-end combat power. If we can take them away, I think we're obligated to do so. I'm not even asking you guys to help me plant the formations. I'm just asking for some help and resources to take them away. The church will even receive a huge portion of the corpses, since I certainly can't do much with them. I'm doing all the hard work. All I want is a bit of willingness to step up and do what's right. The two were silent for a bit, Luna eventually nodding. Very well, John. I'll get you the help you want. But that doesn't answer my questions about the aftermath. I'm well aware of what's going to befall me as a result of all this, and I'm going to handle it. Are you the one behind all of those massacred villages? They're migrating to cities because of that. I've been doing nothing but operating Iron Legion according to its doctrine. The two of us looked into each other's eyes, Luna frowning. I'm starting to realize how much power you've acquired, John. These games are dangerous, and you're beginning to play with the centuries-old powers, making waves and plans far older than yourself. You're not at the authority that allows you to survive the ire of anybody you're about to make very unhappy. I hardly care about an angry sovereign, because not one person has the intelligence, technology, or the attitude to do anything about me. Knowledge is power, and with power come secrets. I have plenty of both, but from one leader to another, I implore you not to try and pry. You can deliver my words to any other curious individuals it may concern. Still, I'm partially glad that my influence is being recognized. At least toward my allies, I enjoy being taken seriously. Saves me trouble. I took another puff of the cigar, Luna maintaining her sharp gaze before sighing and rubbing her temples. Oh, John, you stress me out. Terribly so. I'm glad you are. It means I get to watch out for you, too. Who's watching out for whom? I can already see the day you come running to me for help. I chuckled, Luna tapping her aerial a few times. Keep in contact with me, and I'll make sure you have the help you need. You'll actually have to step out of your Iron Legion bubble. Are you sure you aren't paranoid about intelligence regarding your capabilities getting leaked? Hardly, or I wouldn't have let you in on one of my greatest secrets. Not that you didn't know it already, but it's different when the big powers know my eyes are open. Yes, it is. She nodded, my head turning to the key master. He smiled at me. I'll attempt to provide intelligence on the precise locations of any vaults, as well as the schedules of the nobles who own them. As it pertains to the operation, I'll pass it to you. I appreciate it. It'll help with the tedious tasks. Although, there is one thing I'm curious about. I lowered my arm, my seer knife appearing in my hand, blade crawling with dense energy. I've felt something since entering this place. Not sure if it's you, but it's quite fascinating. I lowered the knife, the blade moving toward the floor. Please refrain. My hand froze. The key master's eyes locked on me. No more of the courteous smile present on his face. I was baffled by his presence in that short moment. I always knew it, but I suppose there was at least one person with the intelligence and the technology to do something about me. He smiled after a few seconds. From one leader to another, I implore you not to try and pry. You're right. That was hypocritical of me. I pulled my knife back, putting it away before the key master suddenly flicked his finger. One of my bullets flew through the air, my hand snatching it. I thank you, John. The intelligence you want will be sent to you tomorrow. I also have a few agents and black companies that can be of service if you'd like their assistance. Perhaps as a proxy when planning the operation and as an option to smuggle the goods. They're quite good at what they do. Sure, I'll take all the help I can get. I'll also be sending you both some intel from my side. Since I'm asking for assistance, I'm not going to keep my allies in the dark. Then I will also keep in contact with Lady Luna. Make sure all three sides are properly coordinated. Perhaps some resources and manpower should also be moved in anticipation for an influx of harvestable crown material. Absolutely. When this happens, we'll need to take advantage of it quickly. When one card is played, another must come down in response. I expect retaliation. We must move accordingly. All three of us nodded and stood, shaking hands and sealing our deals. I smiled in anticipation. To a fruitful operation. That time an American was reincarnated into another world by Spade. Chapter 288, Maginot Protocols. September 3rd, 628. After my deals were made with higher powers, my time was spent moving information. I had to get everyone in the loop while making sure my secrets weren't further exposed. I had already revealed plenty to them, and while some of it was what they knew, as I had said before, the fact that they knew I was aware changed the dynamic. In their eyes, I had only been a major pawn in the game, someone they could still predict and take action around. Now they knew I had escaped the game, surpassed the matrix, ascended to the position of player. The way they would treat me would change accordingly. They also knew that my secrets were deeper than they could guess at. This was especially so for the Keymaster. In the past, I used to feel like he was omniscient. Nothing I did seemed to escape his gaze, no matter how secretive it had been. It was like he had planted a pair of eyes behind my own, always watching. Now, there were things he didn't know about. I wasn't sure exactly when he stopped being so capable of collecting information about me, but it was clear that as of now, there was no power that was aware of my most principal secrets. I needed it to stay that way. There were things I wasn't even telling Amara, let alone external allies. That was for good reason. Some time passed, and while Amara hadn't yet developed the spells to usable perfection, there were still preemptive steps to take. I received plenty of intel from the Keymaster about various secret vaults that even my hotspot map didn't detect. My teams at Sector 4 also started verifying the intelligence I received. I trusted the Keymaster, but some of it was simply old and needed a pair of eyes on it. At some point, only two-man teams were heading out to check on things. Sector 4 was stretched thin, as they usually were, but the results were undeniable. That wasn't mentioning the missions being put out to exterminate more Nephilim. Hundreds were being killed every day, thousands more in the larger operations against towns. Our work continued to drive more Nephilim across the entire kingdom out of their holes and into the cities where they would have a far more noticeable and violent impact upon humanity. Many would incorrectly assume that I was aiding their cause. I simply sat back and watched my enemies make their stupid mistakes. Unfortunately, I was soon to fight a three-pronged war. The heist and extermination could continue without my micromanaging, but there was one thing I didn't plan to leave out of my hands. My eyes opened, my hands gently clenching and feeling Amara's smooth skin underneath. A pool of drool tickled my chest, my eyes glancing down at my fiancée's open mouth. I chuckled before hugging her and rolling, shifting her to her side of the bed before slipping out. She was out cold, having spent all night working on her spells again. I had told her about my deals with the Keymaster and Lady Luna. The success of this operation thus fell on her shoulders, which was stressing her out. Not that she wanted it any other way. I had a feeling she didn't appreciate being given nothing to do as I took care of everything else, so I let her do what she did best. Besides, this was a good opportunity for her growth. When this was all over, she'd be significantly more adept at spatial magic. I wanted to see how powerful she could become with them. Unfortunately, the problems I was faced with only seemed to be mounting. I suddenly looked off in the distance, through the wall of our room and off into the ether beyond. I could see the Great Barrier, still on the horizon, only slightly closer than it had been years ago. It was not what my attention lay upon. I crawled out of bed, my spatial storage unwrapping my normal garb over my body. Having dressed in a few seconds, I lifted my aerial and started sending out messages to make arrangements. Amara stirred, looking at me with groggy eyes. What's wrong? Nothing yet. The scourge is moving on the glass desert. Oh, great. She sighed, slumping back down and burying her face into my pillow. Her words came into my mind. Is it finally happening? Probably. We've known for a while that this day was coming soon. Just be careful, please. Always. I walked over and gave her a kiss on the head before exiting the master bedroom of my estate. Her hin was there, my transportation ready. I was soon boarding my plane, in the air a minute after and my destination fast approaching within some hours. We landed in the base, Erhin dressed in his armor instead of uniform as we stepped out. The base was more active than usual. Not surprising. I arrived at the headquarters, meeting one of my highest generals. General Gaffney, how's the situation? Progressively worsening, sir, as it has been for the past few months. Might I ask what brings you by? He looked at me with some worry. I had been rather hands-off recently, and Iron Legion was running like a well-oiled machine. There had been no outstanding problems, and after some vetting, we had even brought on some more soldiers from the Wedded City and the Teleria family, totaling 2,000. It wasn't much, but their territories were constantly churning out new soldiers that would increase our numbers. So long as our negligible mortality rate was maintained, we would only accumulate strength. Unfortunately, that's not what my presence usually entailed. When I showed up, it was because something was about to happen. My generals knew that well by now. I puffed on a cigar, looking down at the map. The scourge looked like it was advancing at full force. There were reconnaissance planes in the air at all times monitoring their numbers, and there were 300,000 within 200 miles of our forward bases. The intestine was also reaching the front lines. Even being constantly bombarded with routine attacks, it was progressively strengthened and empowered, a massive tunnel of power and fuel for the Scourge's war machine that we couldn't break without concentrated attacks costing more armament than it was worth. It was determined that the armament was better spent simply killing more monsters, but that intestine still served as an indicator of the Scourge's advance. I glanced across the battlefield, thousands of indicators exposed to my vision when I manipulated the map, overlaying all forms of data available. I saw recent attacks, current attacks, battle history, movement history and progress, and casualty counts in various areas. I also saw reports of a dust storm approaching, not far behind the intestine. It had been maintaining a steady distance, but over the past year it had only gotten closer. It painted a crystal clear picture in my mind. General, I've come today to make sure you're seeing what I am. I'm well aware that the situation has been getting worse. Scourge numbers are only increasing despite our constant slaughter. Millions are coming from the crossing, ready to bolster their numbers once more. Even so, wars are about timing. We've been relatively reserved over the past year, accumulating and stockpiling in preparation for the day the Scourge decides to throw everything they have at us. I paused, the moment of silence making the general nervous. Has that day come? It has. From the beginning, I was ready to step out onto the battlefield myself and fight alongside my troops. I haven't because everything up until now has been training for you and the troops you command. I can only hope that this time hasn't been wasted. The general looked at the map, at the same image I saw, and frowned. Forgive me, sir, but I'm not seeing what you are. We've been maintaining. There have been no reports of notably increased intensity. Of course there haven't. You guys can't feel what I can. Doesn't matter though. All you have to do is what I command. You know the Maginot protocols I've taught you about. I've memorized every protocol you've written. Good. Then start putting them into effect. We're about to go into a state of total war. The Maginot protocols will rebuff the incoming assault. The general stared at the map for a short while longer. The Maginot protocols were extreme. They were one of the 3 total war protocols that I had given to my generals. In essence, the Maginot protocols demanded that the line of battle be established and defended to the last man. All restrictions on ammo and ordnance expenditure would be lifted, and all forces would devote everything they had to holding the line. There would be no retreat. There would be no looking back. No enemy would get past any section of the line, and terraforming measures would be taken to ensure that the enemy couldn't simply flank the line. The biggest weakness of the Maginot protocols was the fact that it took time to be established. When battle lines constantly shifted, no singular line could be made. When a line was established, troops couldn't go past it. The enemy could retreat and plan, putting the defending force at a disadvantage. There was little force projection to be done. The protocols could only be activated at a time when they would do more good than harm. The criteria for such were stringent, demanding full knowledge not just of the enemy's current movements, but prediction of the future. It was a huge decision to be made, but the general didn't have much of a choice when I was the one ordering it, both because of my authority as well as my record of being right. He finally nodded. Yes, sir. I will ensure your plans are followed as soon as possible, and as correctly as possible. Flaws in the execution will make our defense that much more difficult. We have some time. Use it wisely. I will be watching. Yes, sir. General Gaffney lifted his aerial, manipulating it for over a minute before quickly leaving. I stood there staring at the map, feeling the movement of the enemy. I wasn't entirely sure how I could feel it. When I looked off into the horizon, I was able to sense the threat to my life. It was getting closer, and I was its enemy. More gut feelings. I intended to listen to them. After handing off my orders to the professionals, I made my rounds through the Glass Desert's facilities. I checked on Polly and how her work was going. All was green there. I checked on our stockpiles. What was in our warehouses alone could level the capital. I checked incoming shipments. The cargo headed our way would triple our stockpiles in just a week. I had already sent some messages to my people at Continuance. As I didn't want my stockpiles of elemental crystals to create a beacon within Kingdom territory, the vast majority of Iron Legion's armament was stored on the island, having been manufactured there. Mining operations on the island took advantage of the incredible deposits of crystals created by the stabilizers for the heart. There was more wealth there than I knew what to do with, so all of it was weaponized as fast as it could be mined. With my command, Iron Legion stockpiles would increase by magnitudes. There would be a virtually endless amount of ordnance and fuel heading our way in just a couple weeks. It was far more than was needed to rebuff the incoming Scourge assault, even at abysmal kill efficiencies. I ordered it all to be moved anyway. My plans hardly ended at a simple rebuff. For a time, I simply watched and took account of all my forces. I painted a picture in my mind, my mental fortress grabbing all the data and creating a war map. With it, I could see all. The Scourge couldn't possibly match me, and I was no master of strategy. I simply knew everything I had to. Their battle lines were an open book. Their incoming forces were more exposed than a stripper with hundreds stuffed in her thong. I had an eye full of everything, and I was quite impolite with it. After mere hours, I already saw shifts in our battle lines. The general established a line, and troops that were beyond it started pulling back. The line was roughly 250 miles long, one end at the coast, the other near the battle lines of Stronghold Echo. In preparation for such a time, the forward bases were already spread across the line, only needing interconnection. Warlocks would terraform the land in the coming days, and engineers would construct fortifications within the earth itself. The line would become a bulwark that no monster could get past, and with an established line, other defensive measures could be in place. Minefields and traps could be laid with incredible density, which meant the deployment of new technologies. Squadrons of bombers could fly across the new no man's land and drop tens of thousands of air-deployable mines, enough to decimate entire armies before they marched within 30 miles of the line. Tanks would become emplacements. Artillery could be spread out and permanently stationed to be used with maximum efficiency, and transport lines could be strewn across the front to maximize the flow of resources. In my mind, it would be simplicity itself to defend the line. My generals were still operating with maximum efficiency in mind. They had gotten rather good at maximizing resources, but soon I'd be letting them loose. Soon, they would be more worried about how fast they could get their weapon systems to fire. It would feel like they couldn't put down enough ordnance with the endless swarms of demons spawn charging at their walls. And with it all, I'd get more footage and records to use in my propaganda war. My covert war extended beyond the darkness of extermination. I shifted gears mentally. I had been accumulating my own strength and technology for months now. I had been working in the dark, doing things nobody else on this planet could fathom in order to support this very war. It was about time to start cashing in on it. I glanced at Erhun, who had remained standing by my side for hours in silence, awaiting my next order. Prepare a plane to the front lines. I turned back to the map, seeing the Scourge stirring. They had been moving like a sleepwalker all this time, refusing to devote themselves to the war against my Iron Legion completely. They had been holding back, waiting, watching. I could tell that the time for watching had passed. They were ready to play their cards, and I was ready to respond in kind. I stood turned away and walked out of the headquarters, Erhin following. It's about time I stepped out and led my soldiers. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 289, Missiles Inbound. September 13th, 628. Amara trudged through soft sand and dirt, Erhin leading the way in front of her in his armor. They slowed to a stop before a line of glowing flares. A few armored trucks went cruising past her, following the lane before trailing off to their destination, their cargo literal truckloads of earth crystals. They crossed the lane, looking around as soldiers ran every which way, their voices echoing past each other despite the option to simply use their communicators. Amara was impressed with the progress. It hadn't been 2 weeks, and John's Maginot protocols were coming along quickly. Although the Scourge was only intensifying their attacks, the combined arms brigades were holding them back a safe distance. The forward bases were supporting with constant artillery fire, and anything that got past was simply obliterated by the rising fortifications and soldiers building them. The fortifications themselves were something to behold. John was creating mountains and using them as his line. He had told her about his terraforming measures. It was a foreign name, but not a foreign concept. Both the kingdom and church often used local terraforming to give themselves the terrain advantage before battles. This was no different in practice, but in its extremity, John had taken it much farther. Earth crystals were armed with preset terraforming spells and detonated in sequence after the soldiers planted them. This led to miles and miles of land being ripped into new shapes by invisible magical hands all at once, creating extraordinary sights. John took full advantage of his preparatory period, and nothing about the land looked the same as before. The walls of his line were closer to cliffs. They were 300 meters tall and 200 meters thick, made entirely of solid stone. They were pulled from the ground below before being shaped and compacted to standard. Then all of it was reinforced, sometimes with dedicated enchanting, more often with simple magical saturation. It was an incredible expenditure, something not even the kingdom could sustain. John was embedding earth crystals into the walls on top of everything else, keeping the magical saturation at high enough levels to tank everything the Scourge would throw at it over the entire war. The riches being passed across the supply lines would send the kingdom's economy into a frenzy, and yet it wasn't even a fraction of what John was pulling in from the island of continuance. More would only flood in, and all of it was being dedicated to this defense. For now, there were even drilling operations going on, warlocks tunneling into the ground. For what? She couldn't guess, but everything was for a reason. Amara continued walking with Erhin, approaching one of the walls. She was told that John was around this area. With some terraforming ahead of the line, John was able to create natural choke points and paths the Scourge would have to follow if they wanted to march millions of monsters to the walls. This meant he was able to create defensive hardpoints along the line. While the Scourge could retaliate in kind with counter-terraforming, it would be a tall task to do on the fly and would be easily nullified by some well-placed artillery fire. The two were approaching one of the hardpoints that John was supposed to be managing things from. Amara hadn't seen him these past few days since he apparently wanted to be on the front lines for these preparations. For good reason, but Amara missed having him nearby every day, not that she wasn't busy herself with spell work. She arrived at the hardpoint, a massive metal bulwark built into the cliff itself. According to the blueprint, the hardpoint would be armed with 2 new turret models that came down from Wonderland only when the Maginot protocols were declared. Each turret only took a single man to operate, but unlike the ones on the tanks and helicopters that had 4 barrels and a single crystal's output of firepower, these new turrets were several times larger. One turret model had 4 groups of 4 barrels. Known as the Buzzkill, it could fire preset spells at rates previously unheard of for a turret, taking 6 crystals to power. The other turret model only had 2 barrels, but each barrel was 2 inches in diameter and fired crystals like a tank cannon. It was a crystal autocannon with a moderate rate of fire and unparalleled fire delivery volume. The amount of large-bore crystals it could put down range was staggering, only possibly sustained by John's endless stock from continuance. Amara and Erhin walked past dozens of these emplacements on their way through the hardpoint, eventually making it to the command room. There, John was standing before a map, frowning as he watched the moving units of Scourge only 100 miles in the distance. He didn't turn when they entered. Amara knew he was focused and most definitely stressed. He seemed to enjoy it, though, always throwing himself into suitably trying positions. Weird man. She moved to his side, waiting there in silence until he finally turned to her with a smile a minute later. Hello, dear. Glad you could stop by. I haven't seen you in a few days. Looks like it really has been that busy. Amara glanced around. Summoners in armor all around the room. The amount of terminals on the walls and desks was blinding, especially with those summoners flicking through screens dozens of times in a minute. John nodded and turned back to the map, his smile fading. To the great dismay of all my soldiers. I'm a nitpicker by nature now, even though I try not to be. And although I'm perfectly fine allowing some room for error, the greater the deviation from my plans, the higher the chance that the Scourge will kill someone when they finally attack. I mean, it's not like you're expecting to get through this attack without any deaths. John turned back and stared at her, Amara's brow raising. Right. I certainly can't hope for 0 deaths, but I do plan to keep them minimal. With all of this planning, all this money, all this technology, and all this armament, we should be able to decimate them without contest, even in my pessimistic expectations. The most danger will compose the high authority battles, but I've prepared our brigadiers and marshals. Not even they were exempt from training. The marshal is out on the battlefield right now, in fact. Right? You put it that way, and it seems impossible for things to go wrong. But still, I know. Believe me, I've thought long and hard about things. He smiled at her, Amara deciding to drop it there. She knew there was no amount of questions she could ask that he didn't already answer, no amount of thought she could give that he hadn't already given himself magnitudes over. Like other things, she would leave this to the professionals. She looked down at the map John was standing behind, seeing the tens of thousands of red dots lighting the frontmost lines. Each dot represented 10 monsters, all of them clustered together and looking like a single mass of carnage. But the brigades were holding the line. Iron Legion had already slaughtered hundreds of thousands of monsters in the past several months, and they would only slaughter more with time. Most people were utterly convinced of Iron Legion's strength. But what worried Amara was what the map didn't show, the intelligence that only John's personal maps from Sector 4 exposed. There were millions of monsters on the way, and she wasn't sure how they were supposed to kill them all. It felt to her like they were surrounded, with enemies taking over the kingdom and monsters throwing their corpses against the front lines. They had few allies in this war, and none had helped them in any way. Amara felt like she was in this fight with John against the world. Seeing that map filled with red only amplified her feeling of helplessness. She moved her eyes away, silence prevailing for a short time as she found other things and screens to look at. John spoke first. So, you wanted to run some missions? He turned, facing his body toward her, giving his attention. She nodded with a smile. I figured I could use some time away from studying so much. The others have been battling all this time, and I don't want to get rusty. Plus, it'll help when my advancement comes around. I'm not actually that far off from Authority 10. With my enlightenments in air and fire, water has been coming along nicely, albeit slower than my previous few advancements. Sheesh. Don't leave me too far behind, babe. Your family might start thinking I'm not good enough for you, like they did back then. Oh please, I doubt any of them even know you advanced to Authority 8. They still think you're just smart and rich. John laughed, brushing back his lengthening hair. Ah yes, money and fame. What more do I need besides heaps of gold to marry the daughter of a duchess? Nothing else apparently, because to them I'm only worth my connection to the great John Cooper. I always did say you were the lucky one in the relationship. Come gimme some sugar. Act. Amara recoiled with a laugh as John suddenly dove in, kissing her neck right in the middle of the command room. She squealed a bit as she tried to push away, his kisses tickling her. Her attempts at remaining quiet in this solemn space failed miserably. Stop. Stop it. Before I freeze your nuts. Not my nuts. John jerked back, still hugging her as they laughed and poked at each other a bit more. Amara had a wide smile as John took her hand, interlocking their fingers and pulling her into a side briefing room. All right, since you want to head to the battlefield so bad, I'll give you some info. The door closed behind them, John bringing her over to a table and tapping its surface. A screen glowed to life, already filled with information about the Desert Eagles and their recent missions. Amara let John lift her up, sitting her on the table as he started explaining. Recent missions have primarily involved taking out the incoming army's high-level combatants. Some larger strikes have been carried out, but it's simply not efficient to send them on extermination missions. If you join them, your next mission will be tonight. Your target will be an Authority 10 King Blood of Anarchy, one that's leading a small army of monsters and other royals and attempting to subvert our construction efforts near the coastline, our furthest edge of the Maginot Line. Amara watched the map flicker through images. They naturally had a plane over those areas, and she was able to see how the Scourge was trying to keep an avenue for attack open in weaker areas. Iron Legion forces weren't so concentrated all the way out toward the coast, but it was an important area nonetheless. They couldn't allow the Scourge to flank them. It shouldn't be an issue to kill the King Blood, especially if you're going to be there, but still be careful. The Scourge has been rolling out new weapons and tech, arming their high authority combatants. They're being trickier, and Phaidon has already been injured a few times. Don't let them catch you off guard. Play things safe, keep your distance. Of course, I'm certainly not like you, who goes charging into enemies like a death shrine. Amara smiled and pat John's cheek, earning a kiss in return. She returned it with some vigor. They hadn't seen each other in a few days, after all. He pulled away and looked straight into her eyes. You'll have to leave in a couple hours. Erhan will prepare the helicopter for you. So, what I'm hearing is, we have a couple hours in a shielded room by ourselves. Amara lifted her legs, hooking her heels around John and pulling him in. John's brows raised. You know, I didn't think you'd want to do anything right before a battle. But if you want to be a little bold, I don't mind indulging. We don't have to be that intense with it. I just wanted a bit of time with you since we haven't seen each other for a bit. She shrank back a bit, face red as John grinned. You're so cute. I love you so much. Ack, not the neck. We shall have our fun together, enough to make up for the past few days. I'll freeze your nuts. Hey, I need those. The two wrestled for a bit longer, using their time wisely while they had it. The helicopter slowly touched down on top of the hardpoint, Amara stepping out. She faced Erhan, who spoke from within his armor. I'll return for now, my lady. Please inform me if you ever need transport, and I'll have it arranged. I shouldn't for a while, but thank you. Keep an eye on John for me. Make sure he doesn't keel over from stress. Rest assured, he had people to do that in his stead now. Amara smirked a bit, Erhan boarding the helicopter and taking off. She turned around, seeing Tana and Arya there waiting for her. She walked toward them with a wide smile. She and Tana shared a hug. They hadn't seen each other in over a month. Amara missed her best friend. They chatted for a time before heading down the hardpoint, entering the large staging room where the rest of the Desert Eagles were hanging out. They would be leaving for their missions soon, all of them ready to step off at a moment's notice. Amara saw all the familiar faces. From Ilinka to Kata, all of them seemed a bit more weathered than before. After some greetings, Blackblood let off a question. No, John. I figured he wouldn't want to miss this mission if his fiancée was participating. John's busy enough as it is. I certainly wouldn't expect him to waste hours playing around here. I guess taking down King Bloods is just playing around then. Well, after what he pulled off at Continuance, yes, it is. Blackblood went quiet with a smirk, Amara not taking it to heart. He was a natural antagonist, but she knew that he understood, like everyone else, that John's place wasn't, or shouldn't be, on the battlefield. He was still a summoner, and he was finally doing normal summoner work. Not that he had before, but at least now he wasn't risking his life in the most dangerous places of the war. Amara turned to Aki as she suddenly walked over to her. The two exchanged a quick hug and greeting. Aki lifted up the terminal with the briefing on it. I've been leading First Squad in your absence, but of course the position is still yours. Since you're back. That's all right. I've been out of it for a while, so I prefer not to change things up, especially not right before a mission. Amara rejected the offer. She was sure that the transition would be seamless, but until she shook the rust off, she wouldn't want to disrupt the flow they had been working with for a while. All right then. Aki nodded, withholding the terminal. She turned to the others. We step off in 30. I'll go check in with Jasmine one more time. The rest of you stay prepared. Helicopters are about to spin up. Everyone double-checked their gear, Amara doing the same for her own. After that, she went back to chatting with the others, catching up on recent happenings. None of it was out of her expectations since battlefield life was battlefield life, but the story still pulled plenty of laughs out of her. She was in a mighty good mood, after all. Soon Aki came back, and not long after, they were heading to the helipad. 2 helicopters, one for each squad, were waiting and already spun up. Amara joined second squad for the mission with Fidan, evening out the power distribution. After that they were in the air, Amara's which had condensing mana around her in preparation for battle. As they flew, Amara saw the ongoing battle between Iron Legion forces and Scourge monsters only a few dozen miles beyond the hardpoint. The contingent they were about to attack was moving to reinforce that very battle, and they had to stop it from happening. Success would mean that their forces wouldn't have to fall back any more than they had, holding the line where they were and buying more time for construction of the line. After some time, they made their approach to the target site. Amara saw the small army, monsters numbering around 8,000. Within that marching formation was the King Blood, surrounded by 24 other royals around Authority 8 and 9. Their mission: kill the high authority combatants and clean up the fodder. To anybody else, it looked like a tall task for 13 people to kill almost 1,000 times their number. Unfortunately for the Scourge, Iron Legion didn't like playing fair. Amara heard Aki's voice echo over the TACnet. Target confirmed. Missiles inbound. 30 seconds. Amara smiled. Their helicopters continuing to hover over the armies completely unnoticed. Not long after, Amara heard an alert signaling imminent impact. Right after, she saw a massive explosion detonate right in the middle of the army. The shockwave rocked the helicopters, the residue from the explosion reaching up and touching them even high in the sky. For more came afterward, detonating all around the formation and obliterating every last monster with the power of runaway mana. They waited, the massive plume of fire and smoke dispersing and exposing the royals and King Blood, still mostly intact. The fodder all around them had been reduced to corpses almost entirely, with less than 1,000 still alive. Their targets were not unscathed. Amara saw the King Blood injured and bleeding. Some of the weaker royals had been outright killed while others were maimed enough to be mission killed and a non-factor in the upcoming fight. She, like all the other Deagles, smiled and stood, prepared to drop. They heard Aki's voice, the hatches of the helicopters opening. Amara ran her jetpack's diagnostic, as did the others. Everything came back green. The command then came. Drop. They all stepped out, plummeting through the air and straight into the middle of the smoking carnage below. Amara's body surged with mana and anticipation, a laugh escaping her lips as adrenaline pumped through her veins. Remembering what she had done to all those Nephilim and the shadow it cast on her psyche, she intended to find every ounce of glee she could within this slaughter. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 290, Pawns. September 13th, 628. After her feet hit the ground, Amara remained rooted. She watched the other Desert Eagles around her move with practiced direction. They had all done this dance hundreds of times, and this was just another mission on the books. Quan and Song shot through the groups of royals and killed them with casual ease. Their blades moved through their angled paths with skill honed over decades, their muscles long ago sculpted by their combat styles. Their blades cut through Authority 8 and 9 royals with little resistance, their enemies still stunned or recovering from the impact of the missiles. Pontek was nearby, bounding across the ground with wide strides and bringing his greatsword down on anything that moved. His enemies always tried to block what looked like an obvious strike, and they had little time to realize what happened when his sword bisected them from another angle. Shadowbane and Tana moved in the shadows of the night, the battlefield often seeing monsters or royals collapsing without warning, new wounds opening on their necks or chests, vital organs always sliced in two. The King Blood of Anarchy let off a deep scream that made Amara cringe. Its aura attempted to pervade hers, but she had long become immune to such. Fidan was the first to move and attack it. His spear moved through space, his skill at warping across distance far more adept than it had been at the Kingdom's special forces, and it could cut down just about anything underneath Authority 10 with a few swings. He was too fast to react to, the momentum behind his blade always carrying strength too great to defend. Yet Amara watched the King Blood not just block his first few attacks, but rebuff them. Fidan frowned, the recoil from his spear making his palms feel like they were going to split. Amara stared at their battle for a few more seconds before suddenly bringing up her hand and flicking her finger. A bolt of air shot from them, piercing through and blowing up the head of an Authority 8 monster attempting to interrupt their battle. Fighting continued, trusting that nothing would be allowed near. Not that there were many monsters that dared to insert themselves into a fight a king blood of anarchy was involved in. That thing would kill anything in its way, including its own kin. There were always monsters stupid enough, though. Amara just wanted to make sure they didn't hamper fighting. She watched for a few more seconds before looking around at the surrounding royals. Finally deciding to make her move, she brought up both her hands and clasped them together. Mana moved through her body, through her veins, the conduits across her skin glowing with elemental power. She smiled as she felt the spell take form, her aura processing and filtering through the raw data of the world around her. Let's try this one on for size. She pulled her hands apart with her words, revealing dense layers of spell formations. No longer were they flat, two-dimensional arrays. Like what John handled in his more recent advancement formations, the latest spells in her arsenal were three-dimensional and a magnitude more complex. What should have been impossible for her to make before she was close to breaking the Great Barrier was pulled within reach by her aura. Warlocks, demanding not just the information of their magic's behavior, but also from the world around them, always had a complexity issue. It was always a balancing act between stuffing more data points into their spell and preventing it from collapsing when they got overwhelmed by the amount. In a way, a warlock's magical prowess was determined by how much information they could handle. Amara knew a dozen different ways to compensate for the information overload. All warlocks were taught some of these various methods from the beginning of their path. However, her aura outright solved this issue. In fact, it solved it so well that it instead became her limiter. Before, if she hadn't been careful, her own aura would liquefy her brain with the information it pushed through it. But now she had a crown, one that gave her a body specifically built for handling magic. After the bottleneck was released with Unholy Light's biomagical organs, her only limiter became her knowledge and the amount of mana she had in reserve. And that was precisely what she had been working on improving for months. The array of magic between her hands grew as she pulled them apart. The sphere of layered formations flashed after the first second of activation, Amara's body levitating into the air and beyond the reach of the monsters below. Then more layers were added on, space cracking around her, exposing fissures of darkness and prismatic flashes of scattered light. A few more layers were added, and then the entire sphere flashed, turning into a ball of darkness, the fissures and flashes disappearing, the spell no longer disrupting the fabric of reality. Amara heard Jaya's voice suddenly echo from her comm system. "Holy shit, babe. Don't kill all of us with the monsters. You know, only my fiancé is supposed to be calling me babe." Amara retorted with a smirk, Jaya humming while charging up an alchemical concoction specially prepared for the king blood. "Sure, babe, and I'm supposed to only have eyes for men. But you're too hot for that, especially with those magic hands. Geez, you're sounding like John when he talks to Fighting." "Oh, but I'm dead serious, honey. Come find me back at the hard point and find out." Amara rolled her eyes as Jaya laughed, opening her hands all the way. The ball of darkness dropped from them, plummeting towards the ground. When it was a few meters above the surface, she snapped her fingers. The ball exploded, and everyone across the battlefield felt space solidify. Then, hundreds of fissures opened up, all of them slicing through the monsters and royals within several hundred feet of the impact point. Every fissure split apart, and then collapsed on the central mass of each being it spawned on. None opened near anything human. It only took a split second, space loosening up once completed. That's when everyone felt like they could move normally again. And all the monsters exploded with blood and gore in reaction, Amara lowering herself to the ground. Jaya whistled before launching her attack at the king blood. Fighting backed away, a small canister flying toward the king blood. It sliced the canister with a blade, shattering it and making it explode with its contents. Its body was coated in a tarry substance, which Jaya ignited with a flick of her fingers, mimicking Amara. The tar ignited, the king blood screaming and resisting with palpable aura and vigor. Fighting continued to attack, joined by Quan, Song, and Aki since they were freed from slaughtering other royals. Amara watched their battle after stepping food back on the ground, Jaya skipping over and stopping next to her. Amara felt a hand wrap around her arm, about to pull away before realizing it was Tana, not Jaya. Tana shot Jaya some side-eye before Amara asked the question on her mind, seeing the sticky flames burn through the King Blood's defenses. What the hell was in that concoction? Just some liquid fire crystal mixed with some adhesive substances. It was roughly Authority 9, so even the King Blood has to burn all of its power just to resist it. That combined with our attacks and the initial missile strike should be enough to bring it down rather easily. Amara nodded with some impression. Jaya didn't have anything nearly as powerful before Iron Legion, but now she could use elemental crystals in her alchemy, multiplying her power output. God knew John had an island's worth of elemental crystals to burn, so Jaya was always given an unlimited supply of alchemical materials. When used like this, it tempted Amara to get into alchemy. Unfortunately, she had her hands full with normal spell work, let alone some of the enchanting work she did for John on the side. She couldn't afford to dabble in a completely new field at the moment, no matter how powerful or useful it looked. Now for my question. Amara glanced at Jaya, who pointed at where Amara's spell had detonated. What the hell was that? And how many more of those could you cast? I can't really tell you either of those things. All right, well maybe not the first question, but the second. There's no way you could cast more than a couple of those. Amara just stared at Jaya, whose brows raised. 5 of those. 10. Amara remained silent, a slight smile tugging at her lips. Jaya cringed. You're a monster. Not yet, I'm not. Amara smirked and looked back at the King Blood. She watched it release its final death throes, attempting to take somebody with it, and failing miserably. Faiden was too fast, and Aki, Song, and Quan had all survived the downfall of their respective kingdoms, carrying the combat experience from those times. There was no way any of them could fall for last stand tricks. Not even against a King Blood. A totally unfair fight, Amara thought, but that's the way it should be. As John had once said, if the battle was fair, you had failed before it even started. The King Blood died, the flames continuing to burn for a few minutes longer. When they finally ran out of fuel, the King Blood's skin was either charred or melted. Amara sighed. So much for crown material. Most of it can still be harvested. Their corpses are as difficult to ruin as they are hard to kill. Jaya shrugged. A few moments of silence between them before explosions suddenly echoed in their ears. They both looked up, seeing the helicopters lowering themselves with turrets releasing repeating spell fire at the few remaining monsters nearby. All of them were killed off before long, the battlefield eerily silent. Amara felt like she could smell the blood and fire in the air despite the witch hat filtering it all for her. The helicopters landed, Aki looking around at everyone before nodding. Mission complete. Let's get back so we can grab some chow. I glanced at the screen in my vision and my vision only, nodding when I heard Aki's declaration of mission completion. All went well. My fiancée had an especially impressive performance. I was proud of her progress. Unfortunately, I might be calling her back from the battlefield earlier than I intended to. My eyes went back to the person in front of me, 2 pale horsemen standing on either side of the couch she sat on. She tried not to look nervous, but I was sure that everything she had seen had her spooked. I could see it clear as day in her aura, despite her commendable poker face. I smiled, extending my hand and letting Erhin take the decree from it. Seems to me like the king is being impatient, 4th princess. Mind telling me the reason for that? It's hardly impatient, Sir Cooper. Your deadline approaches, and the king is simply informing you of the promise you made back then. Iron Legion would not exist without his grace. The least you can do is fulfill your end of the deal. And I intended to. But 500,000 white crystals takes time to accumulate. You've killed at least as much. Are you saying that Iron Legion has failed to do so? With its allegedly monumental battle record. I chuckled in response, letting the 4th princess sit there in silence for a bit while I puffed on my cigar. She wasn't wrong. We had in fact killed well over 1 million scourge since Iron Legion's foundation. But not every crystal was recovered, and it took time to process that which was. I had a stockpile in a secret warehouse where I was piling up the black crystals, but so far there were only about 400,000. The rest had gone to the church for purification, returning to us to be used in manufacturing. I had expected more time to be allowed to accumulate, more time to build wealth so I could reinvest in Son Industries and Iron Legion. We were fighting a war, after all. I couldn't possibly send all of our wealth to the king for quick repayment, but now he was forcing my hand. It seemed like the third claw wanted some leverage, an excuse to knock me down a peg and start a takeover of Iron Legion. I had no doubt that they were a part of this. I would be a fool to believe anything otherwise. I scanned the fourth princess. 37 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, 132 pounds, heart rate sitting around 105 BPM, blood pressure a bit high. Not unexpected considering she was in the heart of the Glass Desert. Authority 9, a warlock with the water, fire, and earth elements, none of which were enlightened. Hasn't seen the Great Barrier, undeveloped aura considering her authority, and more than likely at the end of her talent. She wasn't yet corrupted into a Nephilim, but her husband was. Based on what I could smell and see from her, she had recently done the dirty, around 4 hours ago based on the report from Sector 4 I received when she arrived. I could smell blood, so whoever she had done it with wasn't very gentle. It wasn't her husband either, because he was sitting in one of the eastern strongholds. Normally I'd feel sorry for the guy, but he was a Nephilim, so he probably liked that shit. Fucking heathens. She had a draconic crown around Authority 10 in power. It made her eyes red, a standard indicator of a fire dragon crown, and her body coursed with mana of a density higher than she would be able to handle otherwise. Based on the natural saturation of her body and how well the mana moved, it seemed the draconic crowns were of a lesser efficacy compared to the unholy light crown that Amara received. Probably because the unholy light bloodline was bred and mutated to be a living mana weapon. Felvia Alphen, the fourth daughter of the king, was known to be one of the king's lesser emissaries. She was sent when the task was beneath her older siblings. Then again, all she was doing was delivering to me what was basically a collections notice, a nastygram telling me to hurry and pay up. There was little need to delegate such a task to the first prince. It backed me into a corner rather well, too. Refusal to pay would give them an excuse to march over here and insert themselves. Failure to pay the full amount would be used as ammo to paint Iron Legion as incompetent. They'd probably try to call our publicly released battle records fraudulent. I couldn't have either of these things happen right now, so I needed to gather up 500,000 crystals and deliver them to the king's doorstep. They didn't need to be purified since such magical techniques couldn't, or shouldn't, possibly be in my hands, so there was some silver lining. Still, I had to find 100,000 more crystals to stockpile, all within the new deadline set by the decree in Urhin's hands, which was in a month. Lucky me. I smiled at the princess. All right, fourth princess. You win. The king will have his crystals by the stipulated deadline. And failure to dash. I won't fail, princess. I interrupted her. Quite a rude thing to do, but she didn't complain. She knew how to sit there and take it. Had probably been doing so all her life. I don't fail. After all, I'm not the rest of the kingdom's military. I happen to be good at what I do. Good. I will relay this promise to the king. Now, how will you transport the crystals? We will need to organize such a logistical task. Hardly. The king will receive the crystals. That's all you need to know. Please, Sir Cooper, let's not be foolish. You think you can just dump the crystals in the middle of a field and expect us to retrieve them all? Part of your promise is making sure everything is received in a verifiable manner. I rolled my eyes, standing from my seat. Oh, don't worry, princess. The crystals will be delivered. When they are, the king himself will be able to count each one by hand if he so wishes. There will be no doubts about whether the crystals were properly delivered. I stuck my cigar in my mouth, glancing at the pale horseman in charge of escorting the princess. See her out, and make sure she gets back to her drop point. We wouldn't want any unsavory parties to prevent her return to the royal palace. That would make us look bad. She frowned, and I felt the anxiety in her aura. It made me smile as I walked out. The pale horseman left behind with her in the room. I was starting to enjoy subterfuge. It was quite amusing when my enemies tried and failed to bring me down with unobvious pawns.